Wouldn't it be great if every city in America had a cop blog? A cop blog, kind of like Second City Cop blog in Chicago. I can't think of any other blog in America, any other cop blog in America that constantly is exposing the enormous difference between what people read in the newspapers, what they hear from the police, and what is really happening in the streets. I mean, let's just set the baseline. Let's just talk about something that some of the smaller publications up in Chicago were talking about, but we're getting pretty much a zone of silence from the mainstream media in Chicago. This is from May 28th, which is Memorial Day weekend. It's time for the Federal Order of Police to come out with no-go zones for the public. Downtown and Michigan Avenue were up for grabs last night. Packs of black youths were fighting and damaging property. CTA, which is the bus company, and trolley company, even shut down northbound Red Line trains. And CPD herded them to the L stops and sent them packing. Target store at Clark and Roosevelt was overwhelmed. Stay the F out of downtown. The Federal Order of Police should take it to the mayor and other enablers. Wake up. There were 300 plus animals downtown last night, not one single mention in the media. Ridiculously corrupt reporting. So what happens during a 90-degree weekend when there aren't 1,000 extra cops on patrol, especially after school lets out? Many reports of CPD merely escorting the ne'er-do-wells to the Red Line out of downtown. That's some deterrent. Better advise everyone you know who might be coming downtown to come loaded for bear. Why don't we get a little bit of the background on that when the newspaper finally did get around to covering some of it. Let's see how exactly far from reality they can get when they're kind of forced to cover this kind of story. Cop reporters, they came across a couple of the fellas beating, kicking, robbing another black guy in downtown Chicago. There were several groups, anywhere from 10 to 20 people to over 100, roaming downtown Chicago, beating people, destroying property, robbing people, defying police, and doing stuff like this. But what do we get from Chicago? What do we get from the newspaper there? All we get is a headline. Listen to this story. Police try to keep peace downtown along the lake by directing large groups of troublesome teens to express trains. Translation: there were large groups of black people engaging in really nasty bits of black mob violence. And the only thing the cops did was put them on a train. A couple of reporters kind of stumbled onto these guys accidentally. Let's hear how they look at it. The large groups of teens had been wandering downtown. Okay, so we have a million words to describe what happens when large groups of black people are rampaging through a neighborhood of downtown, destroying property, defying police, assaulting people, threatening people, creating incredible levels of violence and mayhem. And what does the newspaper say? Well, they were wandering downtown, and they were borderline criminal. That's what one of the cops said. Wow. Let's just get some more quotes here, because the level of delusion is just as high as I've seen anywhere in these Chicago papers when they talk about this stuff. Okay, so they're talking about how they just put the kids on a bus, right? Like mass transit for criminals. Quote, the holiday weekend trained a spotlight on the police department's delicate strategy of keeping the peace downtown and along the lakefront, areas heavily trafficked by tourists, without resorting to more arrests or other heavy-handed tactics. You've got hundreds and hundreds of black people creating an unbelievable mayhem, one of the nicest neighborhoods of Chicago, and the paper is worried about whether the tactics are going to be too heavy-handed. And face it, if you didn't see this in print, you would not believe it if I told you to do that. course, then the Chicago people run the department come in and go, what? Nothing happened. Just a couple kids blowing off some steam, put them off some buses. We did a good job. Then they expose their backs, everybody patting each other on the backs while the cops on the beat are going, man, you guys, nobody has any idea what's happening down here because the police and the newspapers are totally in the bag of denial, deceit, and delusion. Here we go. Now why don't we just when you thought the delusion was at all-time record levels, why don't we go to Edwin Yanka, he's spokesman for the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois. He said reports of police funneling groups to express trains were incredibly troubling. Who made that decision? How were decisions made about who was going to be put on the train? Well, they only had two choices. You put them on the train or you put them in a paddy wagon. Now this guy's complaining about putting him on a train. Now the ACLU continues. The police strategy may make a certain kind of sense in isolation, but against the backdrop of the city's long history of discriminatory police tactics, it becomes more troubling. Police should not pick on a single out groups on the basis of race or selective treatment or discriminatory treatment. That's a problem. Wow. And of course you get a real person who knows what's really going on down there, and they tell us that this is an unbelievable. We talked to a former bus driver, and she's saying, "Oh yeah, this is unbelievably bad." She goes, "This retired bus driver says, on most weekend downtown there are large groups, usually between 100 and 200 kids, who go back and forth from the lakefront to McDonald's at Chicago." And they get kicked out by police and security. It's chaos. The atmosphere, it doesn't make sense. They come out of their neighborhoods because they have nothing to do to make havoc here. They're disrespectful. They'll cuss at you in a minute, acting like they have no damn home training. Okay, here's the Okay, this article's pretty bad, right? Oh no, bad is just beginning right now. So we're back to the AC. Now we're back to now we're going to go to a Chicago law professor because they pretty much milked the ACLU for all the ridiculous stuff you could possibly get out of one article. Now we're going to go to a University of Chicago law professor. You remember that school where Barack Obama was a teacher, instructor? Quote, "Such tactics," which is basically putting people on the bus, "such tactics are preferable to making mass arrests, but they still raise red flags, particularly because the teenagers involved were all black," said Craig Futterman, this professor who works on civil rights and police accountability issues. Quote, "It's just as common, at least in my experience, that you have white teenagers engaging in similar behavior. Do we have a similar response?" he said. "I don't know what borderline criminal is. It is or it isn't." Okay, so this professor from the University of Chicago says white kids do it too. Okay, this is too easy, right? Show me, professor. Show me, Chicago Tribune. This is the worst, biggest, fattest, most easily refutable lie I've ever seen in the Chicago papers. White kids do it too. Good Lord, if that's true, how easy would it be to prove? Yeah, Colin, here's a little thing from YouTube. It doesn't happen in Chicago. It doesn't happen downtown. It doesn't happen at the carnivals. It doesn't happen at the sporting events. It doesn't happen just day to day to day. This kind of large-scale violence in Chicago and mayhem is a black thing, capiche? And now we've got a professor from the University of Chicago saying white kids do it too and nobody calls them on it? Because calling law professors, when they say ridiculously stupid things like that, apparently that makes the black kids angry.